Today we're going to be covering how to do a bouncing ball in Adobe Animate. Now, what we're going to utilize is the motion tweens. We're going to learn how to create symbols, and we're going to learn how to insert keyframe all, and we'll also cover a few different layers, and that's where we'll get started. So go ahead and click on ActionScript 3.0. Change your size to 1280, width by 720, height. And then you can go ahead and center this if you'd like. I'm actually going to zoom out once, holding Control and then pressing minus to zoom out once. So now I'm at a zoom of 50%. And what we're going to do is we're going to animate a bouncing ball bouncing from one side of the screen, from the left side of the screen, all the way to the right side of the screen. But we're going to have it bounce at a minimum of 3 times. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create what is called a ground line. And this is going to help us figure out where the ball is actually bouncing. So I'm going to start by renaming my first layer ground line. Simple enough. And now I'm going to go ahead and take my line tool, and I'm simply just going to go ahead, I'm going to make the stroke a little bit thicker to make sure it's easy to see. And I'm just going to draw a straight line. And that's going to be my ground line. And what I'm going to do at this point is just lock it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new layer, and I'm going to call this ball. Now on this layer, you guessed it, I'm going to go ahead and use my oval tool, and I'm going to go ahead and change my color. You can change it to really honestly any color you want, but I'm going to show you something that kind of adds some depth to it, and it'll introduce you to what is known as gradients. So I'm going to start by using this black and white radial gradient. You'll see how it radials out the gradient. So this is a linear gradient. It goes from light to dark, from one side to the other side, whereas radial goes from the center and in a sort of a radius goes outwards to another color. Now I'm going to start by clicking, dragging, and holding Shift when I create this. Using my selection tool, this is just a matter of choice, but it should get you some hands-on if you do follow this exactly as I am creating it. Some practice between selecting just the outline layer as well as selecting just, let's just say, the fill color layer. So I'm going to select just the outline layer, and I'm going to delete it. It might not look like it's deleted, but it is. So now if I select this, I only have this color. Now the other thing I'm going to do is, with my radial gradient still on my fill color, I'm going to select my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to click a little bit, like, let's just say over here. And it gives it that illusion that the light source is coming from this way downward. And I think it adds a little bit, sort of, I guess you could say, realism to it, but it certainly adds a lot of depth perception to it, and it just makes it look a little bit nicer. So I'm going to want this ball, in this particular case, just be a little bit smaller, not much, just a little bit. And I'm going to start this ball bouncing from over here. So it's going to go womp, womp, womp. Now I showed you in the introduction to the timeline keyframe animation, really short, brief little kind of demonstration, but we're not going to do keyframe animation exactly the same way. I'm going to bring this to 60 frames, and in order to do that, I have, at the moment, I only have 2 layers. So let's just recap on what we've done so far. We created a ground line, we locked it, and we created the ground line using the line tool. Using the line tool, just holding Shift to make it a straight line across. Now going to the ball, what I'm going to do is I need to create this into a symbol. Now there's 3 different ways to create symbols. I'll show you all 3, and I'll start by showing you the most obvious way. So I select my ball, I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to go to Convert to Symbol. Convert to Symbol. Keyboard shortcut F8. So now I'm going to go ahead and name this ball. It's going to be a graphic, and I'm going to press OK. And now from here, what I'm going to do is at frame 60, I'm going to right click. I can do each one of these individually. I can select on my ground line. Now, even though I have it locked, I can still adjust the amount of frames it has. I just won't be able to edit any content on here. So if you notice, I can't select anything on this layer. It's because I have it locked. I'm going to go to frame 60. I'm going to right click and I'm going to hit insert frame. Now you'll notice the ball disappears. If you were following along in the introduction of the timeline, you'll know exactly why. It's because our playback head is on frame 60 and not on frame 1, because we only have the ball on frame 1, whereas the ground line we have now for 60 frames. So the other thing we need to do is on frame 60 on the ball layer, we need to make sure we right click and insert frame. Now from this point, you'll notice if you grab just your selection tool, your ball now has a blue outline around it, a sort of a blue selection box, if you will. And that is because we converted it to a symbol. Now, what we want to do from this point, in order to get this to animate, instead of using that keyframe animation we were using with the F6 keyboard shortcut, or you can always right click, insert keyframe, or insert blank keyframe. What we're going to do is I'm going to right click on the ball layer. I'm going to go all the way up to what is called create motion tween. Now, I want this ball to bounce about 3 times. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, something like that. So on frame, I'm not too concerned about the weight and timing of this at the moment. I'm just going to go probably like every 12 frames, every half a second. I'm going to make sure this ball bounces, making contact with the line. And again, I still have my ground line locked, so I won't be able to make any modifications to it. But you'll notice right when I make that movement that from frame 1 to frame 12, that it automatically created this line for us. Now, once you create the motion tween also, you'll notice it changes blue. And you'll notice it once I made the movement, it created a little diamond and this line here. Now from frame 1 to frame 12, it goes from point A to point B, and I'm going to go ahead and push forward and go from frame 12 to frame 24 every half second or so. And I'm just going to start to frame 24, 36, so 1, 2, 48, 60, and I want it to bounce off stage, so I'm going to need 12 more frames or so. So I'm going to right click, insert frame, right click, insert frame, and now I'm going to take this ball off at frame 72. And when I play this back, it should look something like this. The little play buttons down here. 1, 2, 3. So we're off to a good start here. Now I can make some adjustments here just like I can with my shape tool when I have a shape drawn on the stage. If I hover over the line, it'll allow me to curve it and make adjustments to these lines as well. So I can start out by just sort of making these have some nice curves to give it that more of a realistic bounce. It's not going to just bounce up and down in a linear format. And I'll go ahead and adjust this one, and I'm going to make this bounce a little bit more out there. This one I'm going to bring here because I want it to bounce 3 times. Okay. And if you notice, if I just click on this line, then I can adjust the entire line. I don't want to do that. I just want to hover over and just adjust one miniature line sort of at a time. And I'm going to want this line to sort of bounce a little bit lower than the other one. So it's going to go womp, 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 womp. So now when I play it back, I have this bouncing ball. Womp, womp, won't. And I wasn't too worried about the weight and timing of this particular lab since we're just starting out. But one thing I am concerned about, I want to teach you right away how to create a squash and stretch. Now, this is a good point to save. So go ahead and save your file. What I want to show you is we're going to create something called an insert keyframe all. Now this is really, really important. But without doing it, I'm going to show you. Don't follow along up to this point. I just want you to watch for the moment. And I'm going to go ahead and scrub forward. And while this ball comes down, I'm going to undo all this in just a moment. I just want to show you first what we're going to try to avoid. On frame 10, I'm going to go ahead and squash and stretch this. Now the problem with it is it holds that shape for the rest of the animation, and I don't want it to do that. Except on the first frame, because the first keyframe is different. But as for all the rest of these little diamonds, it doesn't hold the same information. And the reason is because we have to tell Adobe Animate, we want you to retain all this information. Because what it did when we first created all these diamonds is it only keyframed just the position and not the scale. So for each one of these following frames, since we didn't adjust the scale of it, it didn't keyframe it, even though there's a little diamond here. If I click on here, you'll notice I should have scale on here now because I just recently changed the scale, but before that it would just have, in this case, location. So I gotta make sure that I tell Flash that I don't want it, or that I do want it to retain that same shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to undo a little bit here until I get rid of that little diamond. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do what is called an insert keyframe all. And this is going to keyframe it not only just on the position, but insert keyframe all, also the skew and the scale, most importantly, for this particular lab. Now I'm going to go insert keyframe all. I'm going to go ahead and push forward. I'm going to right click, insert keyframe all. And this is really repetitive, but it will save you headaches in the long run. Right click, insert keyframe all. Scrub through. Right click, insert keyframe all. Scrub through. Right click, insert keyframe all. So now when I play this back, bounce, 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 it doesn't appear like it's done anything differently, but it technically in a way has. You just can't physically see it yet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a squash and stretch. Every 2 frames or so before it makes contact with the ground, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my free transform tool, and I'm going to go ahead and just now squash and stretch. So I'm squashing it inward this way and then outward the other way. And then when it makes contact, you're going to see it retains that information now. Now it does not change shape every single, or it doesn't hold that same shape for every single frame. So go ahead and make sure. I'm going to do this 2 frames after the initial contact position. And it gives it a little bit more life to it. And the word animation sort of is life. So you may have heard of this term more so with zombies. And zombies has this cool word called reanimation. So what happens when they come back to life? They reanimate, or reanimation. So animation means bring to life. So now I've got this bouncing ball that has a little bit more character. It's a little bit more fun to watch. It's got these cool curves instead of these really straight angular line work or curves or whatever you want to call it. Line of action, excuse me. And now I'm going to go ahead and watch this bounce. And one more time, just 2 frames or so before. And 2 frames or so after. And now what I've done is I've created this ball having a nice little, so far just a stretch effect. I haven't actually made it squash yet, which I'm going to do next. So now on this frame, animation is really a matter of when creating animations, there's so many different passes you have to take each time in order to get it to look right, that it's really just sort of like this step-by-step process on adjusting certain things, such as in this case, I did the line work first, adding some curves once I got the animation in there, and then I'm going to go ahead and insert all these keyframes, and then I'm going to go ahead and start adding the squash or the stretch, and then I'm going to do the squash last, because the squash here, per se, squash and stretch. Once you do that, excuse me, the ball itself, now we need to relocate the position of it. So I'm just going to hold shift to just bring it straight down, and now you're going to notice this ball comes down, it squashes, it stretches, and the position is slightly changed. So in this particular case, I'm going to go ahead and just adjust this just ever so slightly. And you can actually, if you want, just give it a rotation, because now it's go like so. So now it's just going whoop and sort of bouncing into that shape and then out of. So here, you may even want to go ahead and just make it make contact with the ground. And that's just getting a little, maybe too intricate, but whoop, bouncing upward. Here, I'm going to add the squash. And you'll notice I'm doing this all in passes, so now I'm adding that squash. But now I'm going to go back here, because I want to give it a little bit of a rotation. I just think it adds a little fun factor to it. For the minimum requirements, I'm only looking for the squash and stretch, 3 bounces, and you can see them in the requirements. 1, 2. I'm going to go ahead and adjust this one, and then I'm going to go ahead and simply use my arrow keys to sort of adjust that out. And now I'll play this back, and I'm going to do it one more time here, and this has to come down, and I'm going to squash and stretch, bring this down, and then I'm going to go over here, add a slight rotation, go ahead and just shift this out, and I'm going to adjust this one, slightly rotate, and now I've got this ball that is bouncing with a little bit more fun to it. So go ahead and get your bouncing ball to sort of bounce 3 times across the stage using the motion tween. And if you have any questions, inbox me, and I hope you enjoyed this lab.